Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Ferrioli. My pronouns are she, her, and it is as yet an undetermined day in Seattle because it's still dark outside, and B, I haven't had my second cup of coffee. Um, it is October 21st of 2024. We're in the home stretch of this year, uh, and I'd like to welcome you all to Open Source Stories with our guest, Rich Bowen. Rich, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Rich Bowen. I'm he, him. And it's later in the day for me because I'm in Kentucky, toward the eastern side of the United States. I am involved in the Apache Software Foundation. That's where I've spent most of my time in open source. Uh, but I'm currently a open source strategist at AWS.
Very cool. We're happy to have you here. You just got back from Community Over Code in Denver, too,
That's
right?
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
you're,
that's that I have been involved with since 2000, and I've been involved in producing it since about 2002. I've turned that over to somebody else, but yeah, it's one of my favorite events.
I've seen some of the talks from it from this past year, and it's now on my short list of conferences to try to make it to. So before we dive into kind of one of what is sure to be many of your open source stories, um, let's start it off with a little bit of a fun question. So, what has what has been one of your most rewarding non-tech hobbies?
So I've been collecting knives since I was about 10, and I had a very large collection that got stolen out of my car about 20 years ago. And so I've been after a period of mourning, I've been slowly rebuilding that collection since then. But about a year and a half ago, it occurred to me that all of my hobbies were typey hobbies, and I wanted to delve into something a little bit more uh, physical. And I decided that I would start making knives. And I've from from a starting from a kit back a year and a half ago. I've kind of expanded that. I'm not yet forging blades. That's still next on my list. But I buy blades and I make handles out of various materials. And it's kind of cool making a physical object that you can hold and give to friends. So that's kind of the non-technical hobby that I've picked up just recently.
Mm-hmm.
The other one, I mean, even that has a tech aspect because I can buy power tools. The other hobby that I've had for longer is geocaching, which is extremely geeky, but is not directly related to my day job.
Well, neither are knives. Hopefully.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, I feel like a lot of people in tech and especially people in open source tend to really need that tactile
Yeah.
aspect. And I'm sorry about your knife collection. That sucks.
Yeah,
So,
that was hard, but it's been 20 years, so I'm starting to get over it.
I mean, I can hold a grudge for a long time, so it's okay to be salty about that. Do you have a whetstone? Do you sharpen your own blades?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
I have several stones of increasing grit, so I can put a razor blade, a razor edge on those things.
I feel like that is a hobby that pays off
Yeah,
because sharpening knives is a delicate business.
it
So,
is, and
yeah.
I have cut myself many times. So you
Oh,
know,
okay. Well, let's. I have no high horse on that arena since I cut myself with apparently fruit. But like, you know, I encourage the blood to stay inside the
yes,
body as
definitely.
much as possible. Okay, so you've had quite the career in open source over the years. And I'm wondering what has been the most kind of unexpected aspect of it for you? What's been like the most oddball experiences that you had?
Well, the most oddball experience was when an open source conference led to whitewater rafting. In So in 2006, I went to Sri Lanka for ApacheCon, and at the end of the event, I got roped into going out into the jungle with a bunch of my new friends to go whitewater rafting in Kitulgala, which is right in the middle. If you're not familiar with Sri Lanka, there's Colombo on the west coast, and the rest of the island is forested and just the most gorgeous place I've ever been. And I went whitewater rafting with a number of people, including Dave Ricordan, who ended up being uh, President Obama's IT director. And also on that trip, I met Arthur C. Clarke, who was living in Colombo at the time. And so, all of this, the whitewater rafting was awesome. But the thing that has been the coolest about open source has been meeting and occasionally becoming friends with people who have changed the world substantially. Um, one of the cool things that was part of conference planning when I ran ApacheCon for so many years was that I got to invite the keynotes, and that was always completely self-serving. Douglas Adams and Arthur C. Clarke and Hugh Howey and various other people that I really desperately wanted to meet, and got to invite them to the conference and then hang out with them. So that's been one cool aspect of it. But the other side of it is meeting people that have been influential in open source, and by extension to technology as a whole. Meeting someone like Ward Cunningham comes to mind. And for those of you that don't know, he's the guy that coined the word wiki and invented the technology around wikis. And he had this wonderful vision for what the web could be as a collaborative place where we all create that content together. And talking with him about his disappointment of how spammers ruined everything was but it was discouraging, but he just had this wonderful vision.
It really put the empowerment of information into the hands of everyone, because HTML, especially in the early days, was very, and like, it was considered a big barrier for folks. And so if people could just write their normal text, that was huge.
It was, and it was cool to meet him.
Mm-hmm. So I am I am jealous of your conference running days, and now I'm inclined to maybe start my own conference so I can invite some of my own heroes. Um, who else was on that list of people that, like, your wish list of people that you wanted to invite, whether or not they accepted?
A couple of years ago, I invited Tad Williams, and he is the author of the Sorrow and Thorn series. And it was a fun conversation because he accepted, he was excited about it, but his wife said no, he has book deadlines. And then COVID happened, and we never actually got him to a conference. But he's somebody that is still on my list to hope that I can meet someday.
I cannot imagine what it was like meeting Douglas Adams.
He was hilarious in person. He was as funny as his books.
That is extremely surprising to me, because I feel like there's so much jam packed into the Hitchhiker's books
Yeah.
that there's no way that could happen in real life. like the limit of my brain is that if I had that much humor, it would all be on paper and none of it saved for in-person interactions.
Yeah, yeah, people do tend to be a lot different from their writing, but he was delightful.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Um, who else on the kind of technical or information or open source side of, meeting your heroes?
Well, there were
Do you
there
have?
there are a couple people that I would mention. One is Brian Bellendorf, and I now consider him a friend. But when I first met him at a conference, what really struck me about him was how human he was. And it was one of my very first conferences that I was attending, and I was still very much in the fanboy stage. And Brian's actually a little bit younger than I am, but I met him in the hallway at a conference, and I thanked him profusely for the work that he had done. And his response, this is 20, 25 or more years later, his response really stuck with me. It was, well, I did what I thought needed to be done at the time. And, I was having fun with my friends. And he's just he's so delightful. But the thing that stuck with me about that was that those of us that are in open source, most of us are here because someone encouraged us. And Brian and various others had encouraged me in the earlier years before I met them in person to step up and do some of the work. I had been complaining about the documentation of the Apache web server, and Brian and also Jim Jagilski said, well, then go fix it. You're allowed to do that. Another story that comes to mind is when I met Vint Cerf, and somebody invited him to speak at an event here in Lexington, Kentucky, and he showed up at our company. Was working for a company called DataBeam, which has been out of business for many, many years, having been acquired and reacquired. But I asked Vint in the Q&A time, what was the most significant, I'm like 18 or 19, thinking I'm coming up with brilliant questions. I asked him what was the most significant advancement in technology during his lifetime. And he said his wife's hearing aid, because she was born deaf and she has a cochlear implant. And this was very eye-opening to me because I also have an implanted hearing aid. And his focus on improving human experience rather than, saying the World Wide Web or DNS or who knows what. That again reemphasized to me that what we do is about people. It's about making people's lives better. So those are two interactions that really stand out from my early days in open source.
I I actually also had the opportunity to interact with Vint a few times, and I heard the same story as
Okay.
well. Um, just a lovely guy, honestly. Very helpful, very willing to go out of his way to help you, whether it was for tech or not tech.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm grateful that there are folks like him in our field.
Mhm.
So um, I want to go back just a minute because something you said really stuck with me about, you're allowed to do X, Y, Z in open source. And I guess before you heard that, did you have a mindset of maybe needing to ask for permission that unlocked?
Yeah, and when I first started, I mean, when I first started engaging with free software, there were clearly these luminaries, these geniuses that were doing all of the work, and I was not one of them. And there was very definitely this disconnect between um, those people and myself. And we tend to have a once we're on the inside, you might say, we have this notion that everyone knows that they're allowed to participate, but they don't. And people like to be invited. And it's more than that. People need to be invited. People need to be told explicitly that this is something that they're allowed to do. And we forget that.
Mhm.
And I went to a talk at FOSDEM this year that was it was Paris was giving her talk about creating on ramps for people to participate in open source, and she really made a shift in my way of thinking about things, that we need to create, whether it's working groups or titles or whatever, create places where people can plug in rather than saying, come join us, come do cool stuff. And people don't know where to get started. And so I think that maybe I had forgotten that initial experience and that moment where someone said, yes, you're allowed. You don't have to have a degree or particular credentials or have invented HTTP in order to participate. And that was a very empowering moment that we need to keep doing. And I also attended a talk earlier this year, Stephen Wally, and one of the things he said really stuck with me, which is that each generation is responsible for mentoring the next generation. And he was talking about the Kubernetes community, where they had this vibrant onboarding process and they mentored all these people and it was super successful, and then it wasn't anymore. And that was because they had forgotten to explicitly tell those people, now it's your turn. Now it's your turn to mentor the next group of people.
Mm.
And that was another moment that was very eye-opening to me, that you got to pass the baton and tell people that you're passing it. Don't just assume that they understand. And mentoring has been, to me, one of the most rewarding parts of open source is seeing people that I've mentored far surpass anything that I could do. Um, one of the really rewarding experiences when I was in Denver at Community Over Code a couple of weeks ago was that 3 separate people said from stage that they were there because I had encouraged them to step up and do something. And so this is, me passing the baton that was passed to me. And it's a way to ensure your own immortality. It's not about doing amazing things myself. It's about encouraging all of these people to come after me and do those things. And so, there's this weird situation that I have where my boss at work is somebody that I encourage to be part of the Apache Software Foundation. So at Apache, he answers to me because I'm a board member and he's the president. And at work, I answer to him. But he's one of those people who 10 years ago, I said, you should really get involved in this aspect of the Apache Software Foundation. And now 10 years later, he's the president and making real significant contributions to open source and speaking in front of the Senate about open source security and supply chains. And that's super rewarding to me.
Mhm. I can just imagine that it must be tempting occasionally to pull rank in jest in the wrong contexts. At least
Yeah,
that's what I would do. To watch the chaos.
that can be fun. Yeah.
Um, so I imagine now you're kind of in the place where some of those early influences were for you, where people are coming up to you in conferences, like you said, thanking you for encouraging them to be there, but also maybe a little intimidated to approach you potentially.
So my wife tells me that that's the case. And maybe I don't know. I tend not to notice it, but she tells a story about a conference that we went to in Chicago where this guy came up to me and was clearly trying to find something to talk about so that he could meet me. And that it was it was a little embarrassing for both of us, but yeah, my grandfather used to say, uh, back home he's world famous, and open source is indeed very small, and it's kind of cool to be recognized, but it's also, to me, it's even cooler to see someone like Swapnil Mane on stage. He's the chair of community development at the Apache Software Foundation, and he said from stage that he's there because I invited him, but he is doing such great work in open source, and to me that's just it's so much more rewarding.
Mm-hmm. So how are you passing the baton and letting people know that you're passing it while you're doing it?
So the one thing that I've started this year is largely inspired by Paris's talk at FOSDEM. I've started up 5 or 6 working groups under the community development umbrella at the Apache Software Foundation. And I'm trying to document specific roles that people can take in those working groups so they can step up and do a thing. And through doing the thing, recognize that they have ownership there and maybe do another thing. So we started a social media working group where people are encouraged to step up and take responsibility for our social media presence. We started a website a website group because our website is objectively terrible, and because this is how I started. Somebody complains about the website, and I encourage them not just to say, well, go fix it, but also say, here are the specific concrete steps. And on the code side, you often hear people talk about creating an easy first issue that people can engage with. And one of the challenges there is it's much more work to document why this is a good first issue and how people should go about engaging it than it is to just go fix it yourself. And convincing people that that's an investment in the future seems to be an important step there. And it's challenging. You're creating more work for yourself, but in the long run, you're inviting people to come to fill your shoes. And succession planning is something also that I've been trying very intentionally to do. I'm on the board of directors at Apache. I'm currently serving my 10th term, and that's maybe too long. And so one of the things that I've tried very intentionally to do this term is to invite people to shadow me.
Mm-hmm.
And so people that are considering maybe running for the board someday, I shadow them and show them what I'm doing, and at the same time, take advantage of their shoshin, their beginner's eyes, to document the things that are unclear and fix the things that are broken. And a month or two ago, a board member resigned for some personal reasons, and one of the people that I had been shadowing, Kanchana Walagetara, stepped into that seat. And so that was really rewarding to me, that someone that I had taken some steps. I mean, there's still a lot to learn, and there's a lot that I clearly did not teach her, and she's trying to learn on the job. But that was really rewarding there. So that's the other thing that I'm trying to do very intentionally, to encourage people to step into these roles rather than saying, well, those old guys, they've got this covered.
Mm-hmm. Bringing up the new generation. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. I think we're coming towards the end of our time. Do you have any words of advice for people coming into open source?
Be kind and find the kind people. There are too many people in open source who are content to be unkind. They're content to show their technical expertise, but not care about the people that are involved. So be kind. Remember that everything that we do, that all software is social. It's all about making life better for someone and keeping the customer, keeping the end user in mind when you're working on stuff is, I think, the most important part of collaboration.
Well, that is a lovely parting thought. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Open
Thank
Source
you, Julian.
Stories. And hopefully we'll be able to chat again at some point.
Yeah, I hope so.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.